There is a strange paradox in the history of country music. Many stars disappear because of scandals. Others fade away because of failure. But Kix Brooks left the peak of success in an entirely different way. Because there was once a time when you could hardly turn on the radio anywhere in America without hearing Brooks and Dunn. The bars in Texas, the long highways of the American South, the stadiums where tens of thousands of voices sang along. Songs like Boot Scootin' Boogie, Neon Moon, and Red Dirt Road were not just hit records. They became the sound of an entire generation of American country music. 20 #1 hits, tens of millions of albums sold. One of the most successful duos in the history of Nashville. Everything seemed unstoppable. And yet, at the very moment when they were still standing at the top, Brooks and Dunn suddenly announced they were stopping. No scandal, no crisis. Just a decision. A decision that surprised Nashville and left many fans wondering, what really happened to Kix Brooks? Because sometimes, the most intriguing story in music is not how a star reaches the top, but why they choose to step away from it. Before the sold-out stages, before millions of people knew the name Kix Brooks, there was only a boy growing up in the American South. Kix Brooks was born on May 12, 1955, in Shreveport, Louisiana, a city set in a region where country, blues, and gospel blend naturally into everyday life. It was not a glamorous place. There was no Hollywood, no stage lights, only long roads stretching across open fields, the heavy, warm afternoons of the South, and families whose lives were closely tied to their communities. Brooks grew up in a relatively stable household. His father worked in the oil industry, a traditional line of work in Louisiana. Music was not the family profession, but it was everywhere. In the radio, sitting on the kitchen table, on long drives through the countryside, on quiet evenings when the family gathered to listen to country music programs. It was a time when voices like Merle Haggard, George Jones, and Buck Owens were shaping the sound of America. And for the young Kix Brooks, those melodies were more than just music. They were stories about real people, stories about life, about mistakes, about hope and redemption. That environment would later shape the kind of artist he became. Not someone trying to appear perfect, but someone simply trying to be honest. From a young age, Brooks began to take an interest in the guitar and songwriting. Not because he dreamed of fame, but because he discovered something simple. Music allows you to say things that ordinary words sometimes cannot express. His early dreams were not grand, just to play music, to write songs, to tell his own stories through melody. But sometimes, the simplest dreams are the ones that can change an entire life. And for Kix Brooks, the melodies coming from a small radio in a Louisiana home were exactly where everything began. But the road from a boy who loved music in Louisiana to a major stage in Nashville is never a short one. As he grew older, Kix Brooks realized that if he truly wanted to pursue music, he would have to leave his hometown behind. There was only one destination at the time: Nashville, Tennessee, the capital of country music. But Nashville is not a place that waits for newcomers. Every year, thousands of young musicians arrive here with a guitar in their hands, and each one believing they have a song that could change their life. Most of them leave without anyone remembering their names. Brooks's early years in Nashville were much the same. No bright stage lights, no recording contract, no place on the charts. Only long days spent writing songs, small performances in bars, and long overnight drives between small towns. Sometimes the audience barely paid attention. Sometimes the conversations inside the bar were louder than the sound of his guitar. But Brooks kept going. By day, he wrote songs. By night, he brought them to small stages. And slowly, something began to happen. Other songwriters in Nashville started to notice, not because he was the most powerful singer, but because he was a storyteller through music. Some of Brooks's songs eventually began to be recorded by other artists. And it wasn't a major breakthrough. But in Nashville, it was a sign that you were getting closer to the door of the music industry. Still, at that time, Kix Brooks was not a star. He was simply a songwriter trying to survive in a city where thousands of dreams compete every single day. But sometimes, those anonymous years are exactly what prepares an artist for the biggest moment of their life. And then, after years of being almost completely unknown, an opportunity finally appeared. In the late 1980s, after nearly a decade of writing songs and performing quietly in Nashville, Kix Brooks received an offer from Arista Nashville. It was the opportunity every songwriter in that city was waiting for. A record deal. But what made the story unusual was this. The label did not see Brooks as a solo artist. They had a different idea. An idea that even people in Nashville at the time were not sure would work. They decided to pair Kix Brooks with another singer named Ronnie Dunn. The two had never worked together before. Two different styles. Ronnie Dunn possessed a deep, powerful, emotional voice, a voice that carried the spirit of classic country legends. Meanwhile, Kix Brooks brought something different. Stage flexibility, songwriting ability, and an energy that audiences could instantly connect with. At first, no one truly knew where this combination would lead, but when they stepped into the recording studio, something began to happen. Then two very different personalities did not collide. They complemented each other. One powerful voice, one vibrant stage presence. And from that combination, a new sound in country music began to take shape. In 1991, the duo released their debut album, Brand New Man. What happened next was something almost no one in Nashville had predicted. The title track, Brand New Man, climbed to #1. Then My Next Broken Heart, then Neon Moon, then Scootin' Boogie. Within a single album, this newly formed duo produced 4 #1 country hits. Radio stations played their music constantly. Tour venues grew larger and larger. And the name Brooks and Dunn quickly became one of the biggest phenomena in country music of the early 1990s. For Kix Brooks, the man who once played music in small Nashville bars, life suddenly changed. From temporary stages, he stepped onto the biggest stages in America. But in Nashville, achieving success is only the beginning of the story. Because the moment an artist reaches the top, the music industry begins to place new expectations upon them. And that is exactly when the real pressure begins to appear. When an artist begins to succeed, everything around them starts to change. Not just the audience, not just the stages, but also the music industry. A machine that is always operating behind the lights. After the explosive success of Brand New Man, Brooks and Dunn almost stepped directly onto the very top of Nashville. Radio stations played their music every day. Tours were sold out. Awards began to arrive. But along with that success came growing expectations. The record label wanted more hit songs. Producers wanted a bigger sound. The market wanted songs that could continue to dominate the charts. In Nashville, once you succeed, everyone expects you to repeat it, again and again. But Brooks and Dunn did not entirely follow the easiest path. They did not want to become a product that was simply repeated. Their music continued to hold on to elements of traditional honky-tonk, classic country, and stories drawn from everyday life. That was exactly what made audiences love them. But sometimes, it was also what made them different from what the industry expected. Because in Nashville, there is a pressure that few people outside ever see. There must always be another hit. You must always remain at the top. And when you already have 4, 5, even 10 #1 songs, the only question people begin to ask is, what's the next hit? For Kix Brooks, this was the period when he began to understand an important truth about the music industry. Fame can arrive very quickly, but to keep it, sometimes you must face pressures that the audience never sees. And for Brooks and Dunn, and their journey at the very top of Nashville had only just begun. While Kix Brooks's career continued to grow, his personal life was also taking shape in a very different direction, because behind the crowded stages, behind the tours that lasted for months, Brooks was always searching for something simpler, a place to return to. He met Barbara Brooks, the woman who would later become his wife. Their meeting was not a glamorous show business story, no stage lights, no entertainment industry parties. Just two people finding each other in the middle of ordinary life, and over time that relationship slowly grew deeper. They married and began building a family together. In an industry where many marriages collapse under the pressure of fame, Kix Brooks tried to keep his private life as normal as possible. Family became his anchor. After long tours, after nights performing in front of tens of thousands of fans, he would return to simple things: a quiet home, meals shared with his family, and a life far from the stage lights. For Brooks, success in music was very important, but over time he began to realize something else. Fame can change very quickly. But family is what helps you hold on to who you are when everything around you starts spinning too fast. Because he had a family waiting behind the stage lights, Kix Brooks began to look at his career in a different way. Because the more successful an artist becomes, the more complicated life in country music can be. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Brooks and Dunn had become almost a force of nature in Nashville. They sold millions of albums. Their songs repeatedly climbed to the top of the charts. Their tours were always sold out. From the outside, everything seemed perfect. But behind the stage lights, the life of a successful artist is rarely simple. Tours that lasted for months. Night after night of performances in different cities. Interviews, television appearances, promotional events, and above all, a pressure that never truly disappears in Nashville. The pressure to create the next hit song. When you have one successful song, people ask, what's the next one? When you have 10 #1 hits, people ask, how long can you stay there? After nearly 2 decades of constant activity, Kix Brooks and Ronnie Dunn began to face a difficult question, not about fame, but about life. Could they continue living on the road, continuing to chase the relentless rhythm of the industry forever? By the late 2000s, a decision slowly began to take shape, a decision that surprised Nashville. In 2010, Brooks and Dunn announced that they would take a break. No scandal, no major conflict. Just two artists who, after nearly 20 years at the top, chose to step back. For many fans, it felt like the end of an era. But for Kix Brooks, it was not the end. It was the moment he began to see his life in a completely different way. When the announcement of Brooks and Dunn's hiatus came in 2010, many people in Nashville were surprised. Because in the music industry, most artists leave the stage only after the spotlight has already begun to fade. But for Brooks and Dunn, everything was different. They were still selling tickets. They still had a loyal audience. Their name was still big enough to continue touring for many more years. So why stop? For Kix Brooks, it was not an impulsive decision. Then after nearly 2 decades of living on the road, he began to realize something. There are moments in life that can never be recovered once they are missed. Ordinary days with family, evenings without stage lights, moments when life returns to its natural rhythm. Instead of continuing to chase the relentless pace of the industry, Brooks chose to slow down. He released a solo album. He began hosting country radio programs. He continued writing songs, but life no longer revolved around endless tours. It was not a departure from music. It was a change in how he lived with it. And for Kix Brooks, the decision to step back from the stage lights may have been one of the most important choices of his life. Because sometimes, taking a step back is exactly how an artist finds himself again. As the stage lights slowly moved a little farther away, people began to see another side of Kix Brooks. Not just one half of Brooks Dunn, not just the man standing on stage with a guitar and a familiar smile, but the person behind the music. Over time, the years spent inside the music industry had taught him many things. Fame can arrive very quickly. A hit song can change a life overnight. But the things that truly matter in life often arrive much more slowly. After many years on the road, Ed Brooks began to understand more clearly the value of simple things: family, real relationships, and the simple joy of creating music he truly believes in. In the world of entertainment, many artists are remembered for scandals. Others are remembered for shocking moments. But Kix Brooks belongs to a different kind of artist. He is remembered for endurance, for the ability to remain standing in the industry for decades while still holding on to who he truly is. For many listeners, Brooks is not just a country star, and he represents a certain era of Nashville, a time when everyday stories, honest melodies, and voices deeply rooted in the American South were still the soul of country music. And perhaps that is exactly what makes him special, not because he was the loudest voice in the room, but because in an industry that is constantly changing, he managed to remain himself. And like every journey in music, time quietly moves on. The songs that once topped the charts, the tours that once sold out, the nights when tens of thousands of fans sang along to a familiar melody, all of it slowly becomes the memory of an era. But for Kix Brooks, life after the stage lights was never about disappearing. It was simply a different rhythm of living. Today, he has entered his late 60s. The pace of life is no longer as relentless as it was during the peak of his career. And no more endless tours moving from one city to another. No more packed schedules that fill an entire year. But music has never truly left his life. After Brooks and Dunn took their break, Kix Brooks began exploring different paths within music. He released solo projects. He hosted a country radio show where he could talk with listeners about the music that had been part of his life for so long. Sometimes he still appears on stage, not with the urgency of a star racing the charts, but with the calm confidence of an artist who has experienced nearly every phase of the industry. Then something interesting happened. After many years apart, Brooks and Dunn decided to reunite for a series of special performances. Not to chase trends, not to prove they were still famous, simply because their music was still alive in the memories of their fans. And when those familiar melodies were heard once again, people realized something. Some songs, once they become part of the memories of millions, never truly disappear. As time passes, the music industry eventually begins to look back, not only at the charts of a single year, not only at successful tours, but at the lasting influence an artist leaves behind. In the case of Kix Brooks, that influence is inseparable from a name that Nashville cannot ignore: Brooks and Dunn. For decades, this duo produced a long list of hit songs, helped shape the sound of modern country music, and became one of the most successful duos in the history of the genre. And then came a moment of true symbolism. In 2019, Brooks and Dunn were officially inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. For many country artists, that is the highest recognition they can ever receive, not only because of the hit songs, not only because of the awards, but because their music has become part of Nashville's history. And for Kix Brooks, That moment was not simply a recognition of a long career. It was proof that the melodies that once echoed from small stages in Nashville had finally become part of the legacy of American country music. After more than 3 decades in music, the legacy of Kix Brooks cannot be measured only by chart positions, not only by the number of albums sold, not only by sold-out tours. It is measured by the influence he left on country music itself. Together with Ronnie Dunn, he helped create one of the most successful duos in the history of the genre. Songs like Scootin' Boogie, Neon Moon, and Red Dirt Road were not merely hits of their time. Then they became part of the shared memory of generations of country listeners. The music of Brooks and Dunn helped connect traditional country with modern energy, bringing classic honky-tonk melodies to a new generation of audiences. And even today, as those songs continue to echo across the radio waves, people realize something. In the history of country music, the name Kix Brooks will always be tied to a very special era of Nashville. In the end, every stage will eventually go dark. The tours that once stretched across dozens of cities, the charts that once changed every single week, the nights when tens of thousands of fans sang along to a familiar melody. All of it eventually becomes part of memory. But some voices do not disappear when the stage lights fade. Because what allows an artist to be remembered for so long is not only fame, it is the person behind the music. Throughout his journey, and Kix Brooks was never the loudest figure in Nashville. He was not known for scandals. He never tried to shock the world just to hold attention. Instead, he chose a different path. A path built on honest songs, endurance through decades, and a deep love for country music. And perhaps that is exactly what made him a part of Nashville's history. Because sometimes, the artists remembered the longest are not the ones who make the most noise, but the ones who manage to remain themselves in an industry that is constantly changing. If this story reminds you of the songs of Brooks and Dunn, leave a comment below. Which of their songs holds the strongest memory for you? And if you want to continue discovering the stories behind the legends of country music, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next videos.